Chapter 3. 3 weeks passed, almost without her being aware. The weather got even hotter, and then the summer holidays finally started. One Friday morning, she was in town on her own. This was unusual, as most days during holidays she would meet her best friend Millie by the ice cream van in the park that lay just out of town by the river. However, that morning, when she got there, she caught sight of Millie from a distance. But now Nancy saw she was chatting with her creepy new friend, Darren, who Nancy suspected was actually turning into a proper boyfriend. And perhaps it was because of this potential new actually first-ever boyfriend situation that she was looking more cheerful than she had done in weeks. On an impulse, Nancy texted to say her mum had asked her to do some shopping at the last minute, and she wouldn't be able to make it. She'd known Millie since preschool. She was as blonde as Nancy was dark, curly-haired and freckled, in contrast to Nancy's long, straight locks and pale complexion. Plus, Millie could not stop talking. Nancy had secretly timed her over a period of weeks, and her record of silence was a pitiful 38 seconds. She would often chat away for both of them, whilst Nancy looked on, viewing the world through a solemn gaze that rarely faltered. People always remarked that they made an interesting pair. But over the last year, Nancy found she had less and less in common with her best friend, especially when it came to Darren, who was nearly 14 and into black T-shirts and skinny jeans and not brushing his teeth and washing his hair, apparently. So, instead of hanging out by the bandstand at the river, where it was relatively cool, Nancy found herself mooching about in the baking centre of town amongst the tourists, the elderly shoppers, and traffic fumes. Near the steps leading to the town hall, there was a stall selling cheap summer clothes, straw hats, and sunglasses. Since the heat wave began, stallholders around town had jumped on the bandwagon, and it seemed that everyone was now selling floaty dresses, floppy headgear, and those handheld fans that mysteriously stopped working after a day, if the propeller didn't come off first and hit you in the face. Nancy was trying, without much success, to get a pair of white-framed sunglasses off a revolving rack, when she spotted him. He was perched on a stone, with his parchment thingy, looking directly at her. Feeling self-conscious, she quickly stopped what she was doing and pretended she hadn't seen him by looking the other way. Unfortunately, the other way was 2 dogs sniffing each other's bottoms, so she had to turn back quickly. To her alarm, he was now beckoning at her to come over. Nancy made a, "Who, me?" hand signal, and the boy rolled his eyes in a, who else?" gesture. "That's a good trick," was all she could think of saying when she got across the square. His eyes were the greyest she'd ever seen, and she couldn't help noticing that his lashes, like his hair, were almost pure white, and unusually long and thick. "What is?" he asked, squinting up at her through them. "Your disappearing act last time we met." "Oh, yes, I suppose you're right," he nodded, whilst looking like he hadn't got a clue what she was talking about. The paper he was holding looked incredibly old, the sort of thing you see in a museum or a film. The writing itself was intriguing. The script looked familiar, but none of the actual letters resembled anything she'd seen before. Even more puzzling, the letters seemed to be writhing on the page, disappearing, reforming, and always changing shape. A couple of times, and only for the merest of moments, she thought she saw a word she knew, randomly appearing on the screen. House, me, time, ergo. "Is that thing electronic?" she asked. The boy peered at the parchment curiously for a few moments, as if he'd never really noticed it. "I don't think so." "Who are you?" Nancy's natural curiosity getting the better of her. Her mother was always telling her off for being rude, but honestly, sometimes she couldn't help it. Oddly, the boy seemed equally confused by the question as he was the first. My name is Book." "That's a nickname, surely." He shrugged and then went straight back to staring at the continually reforming characters on his device. When it was obvious that he wasn't going to answer, she carried on. So, what are you doing here? Nancy gestured more at the stone than anywhere else. Book, if that really was his name, looked relieved at being asked a question he was reasonably sure of answering. Oh, that? I'm here to help. Help who? Help you. Which she thought was an odd thing to say. Her mum was the only person she knew who needed help. But she couldn't ask him any more questions because he'd suddenly vanished once again into thin air.